Matthew Bell here. Today I wanted to talk about a couple of related concepts or interrelated concepts, and I'm going to call the first one the four-legged stool and the second the three-legged stool. Let me just sort of sketch what they are, the conception as to how these relate to your retirement. The four-legged conception is going to be in terms of the advisors that you would probably want to surround yourself with, and the second is going to be the traditional conception of how retirement was constructed. And in addition to that, we're going to get into the idea of how that three-legged stool conception has changed and how that makes those four advisors all the more important in this age, and as I'm recording this in 2019, than it was in the past. Caveats, I am not providing this information for any other purpose except general informational and entertainment purposes. I cannot advise you on financial matters. I cannot advise you on matters relating to investments or insurance or retirement. You are advised, please, to check with competent and licensed professionals who are going to be familiar with your particular individual case and your family's needs, and try to construct a plan with those advisors around you. So, with that preface out of the way, here's what I will say. The four-legged stool is basically a conception of retirement advisors, which basically has them numbered as four different people, four different roles that you're going to want to receive input from when you are planning out your retirement. So the first is going to be a lawyer, an attorney. And the reason why you would be well to advise to get advice from an attorney is because of some of the documents that are really important when you start to plan for legacy, retirement, and estate planning. And some of those documents are going to be things like a power of attorney. If you are injured or incapacitated in some way, you're unable, let's say, to sign your tax return, or your mail service gets turned off, postal service, somebody will need to sign on your behalf, and that person is going to have these powers of attorney. Another is wills to have drafted. A will is going to basically specify where you want property that you own to go after your passing. Now, a will is going to have to go through a probate court procedure, and so another document that has become extraordinarily important for estate planning is the living trust. I am not an attorney, but I can say that the living trust has been called the cornerstone of estate planning. It's been said that really there's only two ways to avoid probate. One is to own nothing, and the second is to use a living trust. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that really they're almost the same thing, because with a living trust, you essentially grant property to the trust, and then the trust becomes the owner of that property. Now, I'm going to sketch more about trusts in a different video, and I've talked about trusts in other places, but essentially what happens with a trust is that you and your spouse grant the trust certain pieces of property. So for instance, you retitle your bank account, you retitle the house deed, and make the trust the owner of those assets. And the idea is that why something goes into probate is that the owner dies. And so if the trust is the owner, then the owner doesn't die. The trustee might die. So if you are the trustee of your own trust, you may die and will die, unfortunately. I'm sorry to break it to you. But the trust itself won't die, and so what it basically does is it provides a continuity of ownership. So again, something goes to probate when the owner dies. But in a trust situation, it's like you're setting up, it's like a little corporation, if you want to call it that. And so the fact that you die doesn't mean your trust dies. And because the trust doesn't die, the ownership of things like bank accounts, cars, houses, and the like of that is going to have continuity. Now, there are certain instruments that are not placed into a trust in that same way. They're not retitled. One of those would be retirement accounts. So retirement accounts, like an individual retirement account, are just what they sound like. They are designed for a particular individual. And if you try to retitle it, the Internal Revenue Service will treat that as a distribution of the assets in that account, and a huge tax liability most likely will result. In addition, Things like privately held annuities and life insurance policies are also generally not retitled. They can be, but because life insurance and annuities are handled through policies that are essentially contracts, they are handled according to contract law. They supersede a will, they do not require probate, they are paid out according to the terms of the contract. So they have built into them some protection. Now, there are considerations under which people may desire to have those instruments reassigned to trusts anyway. Some of those might be more complicated estate planning situations. There is something called an irrevocable life insurance trust that may play a role in certain estate planning situations. And also, there is a possibility that you, as the owner of your life insurance policy, may become incapacitated. And if there's cash value accessible in your policy, it is the case that if that asset were retitled so that the trust would own it, then whoever the trustee is, the successor trustee presumably or co-trustee, if you were, God forbid, incapacitated, that person would be able to make decisions about that policy's cash values. So you really have to weigh the circumstance, think through your options with somebody who is capable of explaining them to you, and ask questions. I mean, I would say there are certain people, certain advisors who just as a knee-jerk reaction want to put everything into the trust, retitle everything. And then there are certain people who want to hold certain assets back. And I think it's a good idea for you to understand what the reasoning is for putting it into the trust and the reasoning for holding an asset back, and then you yourself come to a decision as to which avenue you want to explore. So the first is, again, the attorney. The second advisor that's going to be important, the second leg of that stool, so to speak, is going to be a tax preparer or somebody who understands your tax situation, tax law, and is going to be able to help you to maximize deductions and minimize your tax liability in any given year, and in fact in every successive year. So this is going to be important, not just for your earning years, but also in retirement, when you start having to take, if they're applicable to you, required minimum distributions from qualified retirement and employer-sponsored plans. These are going to perhaps throw a bit of a monkey wrench into your expected gross income and can affect your tax situation. So it's important to have good quality tax advice, somebody that you can go to for these kinds of questions and can help you to, again, establish the best mix of assets and help you to understand the best places to bear down when it comes to tax deductions and helping you to understand what you have available to you as a retiree or as a senior. Another important, so I would say the third leg, is going to be somebody, let's call it the broker. And this person is going to be the person who is often thought of, sometimes they'll say, well, it's my money manager, somebody who's going to be handling investments, somebody who's going to be handling your brokerage account or your mutual fund manager and the like of this. And this person's job, especially early in your life, is to try to accumulate assets so that you have them for retirement. Now, it's not to say that once you're in retirement, you have no more need or desire to accumulate assets, but if the plan has been executed well and put well in advance, then you start to move into an area where you want to protect assets more than continue to multiply them or accumulate them. Again, that's not to say that we don't want to increase our net worths or things like that after we're in retirement, but it is to say that a lot of vehicles, or at least a number of vehicles, that have a potential upside are also risky. They also have an attendant risk that comes along with them. And so it may not be appropriate for a person who is in retirement to have a certain percentage of his or her portfolio at risk in that sort of a way. But nevertheless, many of these managers should be aware of these types of situations and would be equipped to have a conversation with you about what percentage of your assets should be placed more on a fixed or more secure footing. And sometimes this is done in the past. This was done by, let's say, switching you from a more stock-heavy portfolio that was supposed to be riskier to a more bond-heavy portfolio in retirement. The idea being that you are moving to assets that are a little bit more secure than the stocks were, and so as you age, as you get into retirement, they make your portfolio more and more secure. So ultimately it's going to be your responsibility to understand how the money is moved in your portfolio and to make sure you're comfortable with the moves that are made. The fourth the fourth leg of this stool of advisors is going to be the life insurance person. And I say that, life insurance in particular. There's also a conversation about long-term care insurance. There's some stuff relevant to that industry that has recently been in the news, and I'm going to cover that in a separate video, possibly more than one. But just from a life insurance standpoint, there are a number of things that are relevant to estate, legacy, and retirement planning. The first thing is there is a kind of retirement plan called a life insurance retirement plan, or a LIRP, that can be a part of your overall planning. And the person who's going to be most qualified to speak to this is going to be the person who knows the life insurance industry the best. Again, when it comes to legacy planning and estate planning, because death proceeds go to the beneficiaries tax-free, the ability to use life insurance is one of the key elements of a good estate and legacy plan, because there is no more optimal way to transfer your assets to the next generation than through life insurance. So you want to make sure, again, you have a good open dialogue with somebody who is familiar with that. And ultimately, each of these pieces, so sometimes you'll get a person who will say, well, I am your financial planner and I'm capable of covering all the bases. And that may be true, and there are some people whose expertise is in fact wide-ranging, but at the same time, there is something to be said for listening to an advisor like that and then at least ratifying or vetting what they say with separate advisors. So the more counselors you have, I think the more sure you can be of some of the advice that you're getting and some of the decisions that you have to make. Now, why is this so important? Well, this is so important, especially now, and I'm recording this in the year 2019, because the traditional conception of retirement was often referred to as the three-legged stool. And those three legs were supposed to be, number one, an employer pension. So many jobs in the past, not all, but had an employer pension. And this was what was called a defined benefit plan. So today we talk more about defined contribution plans. When you think about a retirement plan, there's really two aspects to it: what goes into it and what goes out of it, to put it very simply. What goes into it is essentially the contribution, and what comes out of it is the benefit, or the distribution is sometimes called. So in the past, what a defined benefit plan was, an employer pension, was where the employer would guarantee a certain amount to you. So for example, they would say, for 25 years of service, if you're making $100,000, then we will guarantee you $85,000 in retirement. Right? That's an example of a pension. But nowadays, most employers, or many employers, are moving away from those types of defined benefit plans into things like the 401k. Now, in a 401k, there is no guarantee as to what you're going to be able to take out, and it's certainly not guaranteed in terms of an income amount. What the employer is willing to guarantee, if anything, is the amount that that employer will match you when you put money into your plan. So sometimes they might match you dollar for dollar, they might match you up to a particular percentage, up to a dollar limit. So they might say, if you put in 6% of your salary, we'll put in 4%. And there's your guarantee. It's on the amount they're willing to put in. So they guarantee they'll put in 4% if you put in 6%. But the risk that the performance of that account is not going to be sufficient to generate the income you need in retirement, the risk is on you. The risk is on the account holder. Versus, on the other hand, with the defined benefit plan, the risk is on the employer, because they are the ones who have to have their investments pan out so that they can satisfy all of the pension requirements of their plan. So this is one reason why employers have moved away from the defined benefit plans, because essentially they're shuffling the risk onto you. And you got to realize that. And make sure that when you realize that, you understand the importance of these advisors to try and situate yourself on more firm footing. Now, this is especially the case when you consider that the second leg of that three-legged stool was Social Security, and is Social Security. So Social Security, of course, has been in the news recently in the last, 5 years, 10 years. It's been in the news almost perennially. And some of the concerns that people raise are that the Social Security Administration is going to run out of money, that it's not going to be able to pay promised benefits. Now, lots of people fall off on this depending on where they are in the political spectrum, and I don't want to wade into that debate. I can just tell you that the system is essentially a pay-as-you-go system, which means that the money that is being contributed into the system now is being paid out now in the form of retirement benefits. So as you move forward in time, the amount of people who are retired compared to the amount of people who are putting in is going to become a major factor, and it is a factor because if the retirees outnumber the people who are paying into the system, it can jeopardize the amount of benefits that's going to be available. So there is a lot of complexity. I recently saw an article, I think it was Bloomberg, and the article said that 50% of older people, people who are in retirement or close to it, 50% of them had nothing saved for retirement, that they were entirely dependent on Social Security. Now, this is scary because if you look at your Social Security projections, and you can do this through ssa.gov, the website for the Social Security Administration, ssa.gov, you can check on your projected Social Security benefit level. I think many people will find that that benefit is less than what they're making now, and probably less than what they feel that they would be able to live on, even modestly. So you're going to have certain bedrock expenses, and they're usually mortgage, utilities, and groceries are sort of your basic bedrock expenses. And in that case, if you find your Social Security benefit is less and you don't have an employer pension, well, now we're down to the third leg of that three-legged stool. And what is that? That is your personal retirement savings. And so that third leg of that retirement stool has basically to do with your 401k, if you have a 403b, a 457, some employer-sponsored plan. Perhaps you have an individual retirement account, an IRA, maybe you have a Roth IRA. And the point is that those instruments are increasingly important for people's retirement, partly because of the diminishment and the diminishment of Social Security and also the diminishment of the employer pension. And so to sum this up, and I know this has just been kind of a sketch, but to sum this up, I would say that the importance of those four advisors has become greater and greater as that three-legged stool has become shakier and shakier, because you are now, as the potential retiree, as you plan for your retirement, you've got to realize that some of these other support systems are falling away, and so it's going to be falling to you to make sure that you've got adequate resources saved for retirement. Now, how are you going to do that? And what options do you have? What other options are available besides regular 401k, IRA, Roth IRA? You know, you might want to look into a life insurance retirement plan as a supplement. You might want to explore the possibility of purchasing a private annuity. You might want to at least think about your options. And getting yourself an assortment of these advisors is going to be the first place to start. Again, I'm not trying to advise anyone. I'm not able to advise you. First of all, in many different matters, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you financial advice or insurance advice again. But if you did find something maybe that sparked your imagination in the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. I'll have future discussions. We're going to be talking about IRAs. We're going to be talking about Roth IRAs. I'm going to talk more about retirement planning and annuities. And so I invite you to check back and look at that future content when it comes out. And in the meantime, I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you well in your retirement planning.